greater propensity to use drugs, commit crimes, get involved in illicit behavior. So it's interesting because the Mexican immigrants that are coming over probably share more values with the common conservatives in this country than the third-generation American citizen.
Wait, you're telling me that the longer they stay here, the worse they get?
Well, what
the
I'm
longer
saying
they stay here, the more likely they are to commit crimes and take drugs. Isn't that wonderful?
Let me jump in here. I'm sorry, gentlemen. Time for another quick break, folks. We shall be right back with more Frankly Speaking Radio with our two guests, Jared Taylor and Oscar De La Torre. Stay with us. Good morning, my friends. Welcome back. You're listening to Frankly Speaking Radio. Our guests today, Jared Taylor, Oscar De La Torre. Thank you both for being here. You know, we've talked so much about, you know, the assimilation and the long-term sort of effects on these things. I'm curious, Oscar, we'll direct this to you first. If minorities should be given special consideration, and I think that we can all agree that to a certain extent that does occur, even if it's just through things like affirmative action or whatnot. What would happen if Hispanics are to replace whites as the majority population in America? I saw a story in Texas, and it said that Texas has now become a minority-majority state, which, you know, it doesn't make any sense. You can't be a minority and be a majority. It's just one or the other. But if Hispanics were to become the majority in America, what would happen then?
Well, I think you know, the country will continue to prosper because those Hispanics are bought into the system. You know, they're going to pay taxes. In fact, we want to make sure that those Hispanic children, who are the majority now of the kindergartners in Texas and California, continue to prosper, get their education, because that's how they're going to be able to pay into the Social Security system, so that all Americans will be able to benefit. So, I mean, we shouldn't have fear in our hearts. We should have hope. And if we want hope, we want to look at people for the contributions that they make, not for what they're taking. And that's really important, you know, to look at the contributions that people make. So I don't fear the demographic shift that's going to happen. I mean, it's inevitable because people are not having children. I mean, who are you going to blame, you know, for that? If people aren't having children and other people are, you know, that's just the way people choose to, they're making a choice, you know. But the main thing is that we support the Constitution of the United States of America, and I think most Hispanics, you know, that I know, at least here in Los Angeles, support the Constitution, support this country, have died for this country, and will continue to do so in the future.
Well, I'd like to know how many Hispanics have read the Constitution or could quote a single line from the Constitution. The idea that Hispanics or Mexicans come to the United States with some kind of great admiration for the 14th Amendment, I think that's pie in the sky. As far as the contributions that Hispanics make, it's often claimed that Hispanics have particularly good family values. Well, the fact is that fully 40% of Hispanic women who gave birth in 1999 were unmarried. Likewise, Hispanics under the age of 14, Hispanic girls, have a birth rate 4 times the white rate. Hispanics are more likely to get abortions than whites, despite their alleged family values. I think all of these things are very important consideration in who we are going to add to this country. Hispanics are also about 5 times more likely than whites to be arrested for murder. Why should we increase this portion of the population? At the same time, it's not simply a matter of birth rates. Obviously, a huge increase in the Hispanic population is not a consequence of birth rates, it's a consequence of immigration. Therefore, the demographic change is not inevitable. Demographic change could be stopped right now. If immigration were stopped and the estimated 11 million illegal immigrants in this country were deported, there would be a radical and marked change in what's likely to be the shift. It's very easy for our guest to say that it's fine to have hope in our hearts, but it's very easy for Mr. De La Torre to have hope in his hearts because the people who are coming in are people like him, people who share his view, people from his background, his culture, his race, his anticipations. It's all very well to say, no, we can't have fear. But if his own country were changing in precisely mirror image directions, as I said before, What if whites are pouring into his country, changing his country the way Mexicans are changing this country? I don't think he'd be saying, oh, we must have hope. There's nothing to fear. The demographic shift is inevitable. And, hey, it's just going to be great anyway. I don't think you'd take that view at all. You've got to be fair for one and fair for the other.
Well, in all fairness, my country is the United States. This is my country. This is a country that I'm loyal to. And even though my parents are from Mexico and I'm proud to be culturally Mexican, I'm still a loyal American, and I'm an American citizen. I pay taxes, and I serve this country, and I'll continue to do so. But I think the important thing, is that we look at all these statistics that Mr. Taylor's talking about, that Mexican women have a greater fertility rate. That's true. But if we want to start playing that game, well, imagine I can say this, and this is true. The majority of abortions in this country are for white women. The majority of people that are on welfare are white people. The majority of people in prison in this country are white. And let's not talk about all the mass murders and all that. That are white. And let's not talk about all the mass murders and all that. See, if you start talking like that, I'm talking about all I'm doing is being divisive, and that wouldn't sound right. That's not something that I support. But the facts, I can use the facts in 300 different ways to make somebody look bad, and I think that's what Mr. Taylor is doing. I gave you an example of what I could do to make white people look bad, and I wouldn't do that. I just wanted to show as an example how terrible it sounds and how divisive it is. I'm not about dividing people. I'm about uniting people.
Look, it's all very well to say that the majority of people on welfare are white when 60% of the country is white. We're talking about rates here in terms of prison population. In fact, the United States, American prisons today, a minority is white because blacks are about 8 times more likely than whites to be in prison, and Mexicans or Hispanics as a group are about 5 times more likely to be in prison than whites. In fact, just the bill of keeping illegal immigrants in prison who have committed crimes is a huge one. And as far as diversity is concerned, Mr. De La Torre keeps telling us how wonderful diversity is. Well, perhaps you're aware of the fact that in your state of California, in the Los Angeles area, the prisons have been in a state of lockdown for the past 4 or 5 days because of race riots between blacks and Hispanics.
If I can jump in right there, I'm sorry. A quick break, folks. We'll come right back. We'll pick it up right after this. Good morning, my friends. Welcome back. Got a good 20 minutes or so left in the program here with our two guests, Jared Taylor, Oscar De La Torre. Thank you both again. Jared, please continue. You were just referring to the race riots out in California and the prison systems, of which I did follow as well, and they were certainly pretty substantial.
Yes, now 2 blacks have been killed in the last several days, and there have been approximately 40 people hospitalized because of what amounts to race riots. There is a Sheriff Baca, who is in charge of the Castaic prison, I believe it is, where some of the worst rioting has taken place. He says it's simply a matter of racial pride. You can't put people in, mix them by race without this sort of thing happening. He would prefer to divide the prisoners along racial lines, segregate the dormitories. But you can't do that legally. In an emergency of the kind that he's had now, where as soon as they are mixed together, they start rioting, he has engaged in temporary segregation, but he's very worried about the legality of that. Of course, once you put the prisoners back and mix them together where they can enjoy diversity, they'll be at each other's throats again. But legally, he's obliged to do that. You have the same thing in many high schools in the Los Angeles area where blacks, Hispanics, and sometimes other groups, Armenians, for example, they get into riots. And on Cinco de Mayo, it was, just this last year, you had a huge number of absences because the rumor got around that on May 5th, the Mexican Americans and other Hispanic students were going to attack the blacks, that there was going to be a huge riot. It turned out that rumor was not true, but about 3 times as many as normal people just stayed away from school because they took that very seriously. This is the kind of thing that diversity brings. Well,
Oscar, please respond to that.
Let me say that the vision that Mr. Jared Taylor has for this country is exactly the type of vision what we're seeing played out. The division of people, the riots, the race riots, fighting between people. People identifying themselves by their race. That's not a vision that I feel that most Americans want. People want to be respected. People want to be a part of the American system. And we need to enfranchise all of those people. To say that the prison riots are happening because we have an overpopulation of people. If you put any two groups, if you put whites and Asians, and you crowd them and you stress resources, human beings are going to fight. These types of fights weren't happening 10 years ago. But 10 years later, California has invested so much in prisons. We've built more prisons than universities. And yes, we are turning into a police state. That's the real enemy. The real enemy there is that the government is investing more in prisons than in schools. And the outcome is that we have a lot of people without good jobs entering the life of crime. We need to invest in prevention and intervention. Like somebody said, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of punishment. But this country is run by money, and because of that, the people that run the prisons, they have their unions, and they support candidates who support laws like 3 strikes, strict sentencing laws that for nonviolent offenses. And we have the majority of the prisoners in this country are for drug offenses and not violent offenses, and therefore, you're having the prisons blowing up in terms of racial conflict. But it's not really racial. Most of it has to do with just overpopulation of our prisons. It still happens to be that there are Latinos and blacks fighting, but that again goes back to the problem of racism and sentencing, where black people are 8 times more likely to get more time for a similar crime than a white or even a Hispanic. So it has a lot to do with discrimination in the judicial system, racism and sentencing, and the overpopulation of our prisons. And race is what the media talks about in terms of it being a race riot, but really it's just a riot of men who are in crowded conditions.
Well, no, there's so many contradictions and mistakes in what De La Torre said. First of all, he said that we've been investing money like mad in prisons, and yet they're overcrowded. At the same time, the whole issue that it's a myth in the United States that somehow blacks or Hispanics are discriminated against by the criminal justice system. You can find a very careful and detailed study of that very phenomenon on our webpage, amren.com. The fact is, the more carefully you look at the system, you will find that people go to jail for almost exactly the same amount of time for exactly the same amount of crime if they have exactly the same record. The reason why you have such a disproportionate number of Hispanics and blacks in American prisons is because they commit crimes at higher rates. That's a simple fact that many people are afraid to recognize. The fact is, you say that people are rioting in the prisons because of overcrowding. Well, if they're rioting, why do they riot along race lines? Likewise, when you have rioting in the schools, in the high schools in Los Angeles, so that you have to call in the police, riot squads, send the kids home, that too is along race lines. It has nothing to do with overcrowding. It has to do with the fact that people identify on the basis of race. I don't encourage that. All I'm saying is that is a natural human state. And to deny it, to try to build a country on the assumption that people are going to completely overcome those natural tribal loyalties, it's just an illusion. It's a mistake.
I'm sorry, if I could jump in here. I know we've only got a good 10, 15 minutes left here with commercial breaks and all that. I just wanted to ask one final question here. With the uproar that's taken place recently around the world over the Mohammed editorial cartoons, do either of you worry that your agenda could be hijacked by militants looking to foment some sort of violence? Because obviously, Jared, as far as the white supremacist type of movement, the KKK, that's very much, people know about it, and you could see someone who maybe was not as well versed in the facts and can actually have a legitimate debate on these issues, who would just resort to something like violence and fear. And Oscar, I've had someone send me a bunch of articles about you that have you mixed up in all sorts of different things with, let's see, one headline here says you're in the news for reportedly mocking police with gangbangers who he refused to remove from his high school after a gang riot. So, things like that. But obviously, you're a wonderful speaker as well, both of you. And these are the kind of things we can have debates on. These are the kind of things we can have dialogue on. But what if someone can go ahead and hijack one of your agendas and set off something, a race riot here in this country? What are your thoughts on that? Jared, go ahead and you respond first.
Well, people don't have to read American Renaissance or listen to me to have race riots.
Oh, no, I agree.
The people who are rioting in the high schools in Los Angeles and in the prisons, it's not just in California. You have lockdown in prisons in Connecticut, for heaven's sake, because there are Puerto Ricans and blacks who not getting. In Texas, you have exactly the same thing. They don't have to read American Renaissance. In fact, my point is this is a reflection of human